Since Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel left office in early 2015, he has been relatively quiet about his time in the Pentagon. But now, 3 years after being forced out, he's speaking to Defense News' Aaron Mehta about his time in office, the geopolitical state of the world, and whether or not President Trump is helping or hurting America.
I think he's done great damage to the presidency, his leadership to our country. He, in his first year, has done everything to intentionally divide America.
The former secretary didn't mince words when discussing his views on the current occupant of the Oval Office.
You can have strong opinions, of course, and fight mightily for what you believe, but in the end, you've got to make government work. You have to compromise. You've got to sort it out. You can't continue to vilify the other side and call them names.
Do you believe President Trump, either his actions or his words, has made the world more dangerous?
Well, I don't think he has helped address the volatility and the danger in the world by his words and by his leadership.
And one of the foremost issues on Hagel's mind is North Korea.
With his tweets, my button's bigger than yours, and fire and fury, and we'll wipe you off the face of the earth, and so on. That says to me he doesn't understand the consequences of a nuclear exchange. There's no winner in that. There's no winner in that, and we must avoid that. We've fortunately avoided that since World War II.
We hear a lot about a bloody nose strike, a strike that the U.S. was able to carry out on North Korea without triggering a nuclear or full-on war response. Do you believe that's a possibility?
Well, if you want to bet that if you're going to attack North Korea, however way you're going to do that, and think that Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans are not going to retaliate, it's a pretty big gamble. I wouldn't want to take that gamble. I wouldn't want to take that gamble. I know something about this business, and I know the kind of conventional capability North Korea has too.
The secretary was unflinching in his comments on one of the most complicated issues facing Pentagon leaders today.
In your mind, should transgender individuals be allowed to serve?
Yes.
People say there's a readiness crisis. People say transgender individuals will create issues inside units. Have you seen any evidence of it?
Never seen any evidence of it. I don't think there's any evidence there. I've never seen it in any way documented, or I've never heard any evidence or seen facts.
Hagel also talked about his views on government dysfunction, particularly in light of January's 3-day shutdown.
I hope we don't have to go through another one of these. I hope this short 3-day shutdown period has taught a lesson to members of Congress who have it within their power, and the presidency, everybody who holds power has some responsibility, that this is not in the interest in any way for our country. In fact, it hurts our country. That needs to be recognized. You don't solve problems, you don't come to solutions or compromises over big issues by shutting governments down. There'll be political consequences, and there should be for people who advocate this, but it's dangerously irresponsible. And I'm hopeful that because of these 26 bipartisan members of the Senate, from the center left, center right, that they will continue to dominate the decision-making and make this government start to work again.
That government dysfunction comes with a cost. Over the past several years, military leaders have steadily ramped up criticism of the budget process, something Hagel agrees with.
When you're living day to day with continuing resolutions like we have been living the last few years, you can't plan. That means you introduce uncertainty into the system. And it's a terrible, terrible thing for our leaders. And it's a problem. And sure, this is, I think, all part of the end result. Now, I don't blame all of 2013. I don't blame all of this on continuing resolutions. There's more to it than that. But that certainly is there, and I think it is a factor.
But in the middle of all this dysfunction, in Hagel's eyes, the United States' position in the world has diminished, particularly in Asia, where Hagel feels the Trump administration withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a mistake.
China is everywhere. China lives there. China has influence in the Asia-Pacific. Of course they're filling that vacuum. Of course they are. The Russians are filling it to some extent too. The Indians will fill that vacuum. Of course it affects how we're seeing in our relationships. I hear from leaders All those countries, leaders from all over the world, meet with ambassadors all the time, and they have the same story. You are leaving a vacuum in these areas that the Chinese specifically are filling, and there will be no other way that this turns out.
Unsurprisingly, another region that dominates Hagel's thinking is the Middle East.
Look at the Middle East today. Saudi Arabia is in huge trouble. They've got this problem with their own GCC partner of Qatar. How does that help them? They've just undermined their own family cohesiveness over the last 70 years. They want to get more involved in Lebanon to try to drive out Hezbollah. They've got a fiasco going in Yemen. Iran actually gets stronger. You've got non-functioning governments in Libya, in Yemen, essentially Syria, I mean, whatever the Russians, the Iranians tell him. Iraq is a balancing act between the U.S. interests and the Iranian interests. That's not going to change. You got Turkey where they are. You got the GCC split, which was once a unifying, important part of all this. Egypt's sitting there in trouble with a president who's eliminating all of his potential opponents for his reelection. Then you got the Palestinian fiasco with the Jerusalem decision that the U.S. made. I don't know of a time when the Middle East has been more volatile or more dangerous.
So what's more of a concern for you then regionally? Is it North Korea, which you've been told consistently is the greatest threat to the United States, or is the Middle East with all the instability going on there?
Well, the most significant and immediate threat would be North Korea, if they have the kind of capability they claim they have to deliver a nuclear weapon onto the soil of the United States. I mean, that's an immediate threat. The Middle East is not an immediate threat to our homeland, to our security interests. Yes, it's a threat to everybody, but not the same immediate threat that North Korea presents.
Many of the challenges in the region can be summed up by the situations in Syria and Afghanistan, both of which Hagel is intimately familiar with.
Was it a mistake not to go into Syrian force and respond to Assad after the use of chemical weapons?
Well, we were going to do it, as you know. It was a decision made by the National Security Council, unanimous decision. I strongly favored it. At the last minute, the president decided not to do it. I think it was a mistake. I've said that. That got pulled off in this exercise of working with the Russians to get precursors to chemical weapons out of Syria, which we never got all of them, of course. Syria was never going to give them all up. But that wasn't a good resolution, I didn't think. Actually, the Russians came up with the idea after the president pulled down and revisited that idea after the president pulled down the attack in Syria. But also, I would say, at the time, the Russians were not there. I think it sent a very clear message to the Russians, very clear. When the Russians saw that action, that was clear to them that we were not going to be players in Syria, and we were not going to be involved. And what they did is they took their little naval base, which was nothing, in Latakia province at Tartus, and used that to build up a huge air asset campaign, troops on the ground, intelligence, Navy, and now they've got a significant set of sophisticated assets in Syria, and now really hold the cards.
Do you believe the U.S. will ever be able to leave Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, at some point we're going to have to. After 17 years in Afghanistan, the situation is worse than it's ever been. I think the American people, the Congress of the United States, are going to have to start asking some pretty hard questions. It's not because the American military failed, but the American military can't fix the problems in Afghanistan. Poppy production, corruption, tribal decisions, topography, all the uncontrollables that are there. You don't have to fix that with the military. You can put 10,000, 20,000. We tried that We had over 100,000 troops in there for a number of years, 17 years. So, yeah, we're going to leave at some point, sure.
Reporting from Washington for Defense News Weekly, I'm Aaron Mehta.
To see and read more of our interview with Secretary Hagel, visit defensenews.com. And next week, Secretary Hagel reflects on his time in office, including a controversial confirmation hearing.
I know I was considered by some Republicans as a traitor, that I would go to work for Barack Obama. And I just regretted that it got so personal, which that did surprise me, and it bothered me.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple News and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, get the latest on the 2019 budget and our take on the Super Bowl.